dear learners of the course of Diploma course in Creative Writing in English. I am your lecturer, counselor friend Kiran Misra, and today I am going to talk about the DC3 course and your block that deals with short story writing. And today I will tell you how to create a setting and atmosphere in a narrative, which is one of the important essential elements of narrative writing, as I discussed before. Let's understand what is most important to a story, and that is the plot and structure, and how should one design it. The typical way in which a short story is designed is in 3 acts. Act 1 is the introduction. This is where you introduce your readers to your characters, you establish your story setting and the tone. Act 2, this is where the confrontation comes. In the middle part it falls, and the writer has a difficult task to keep the reader interested before reaching the conclusion of the story. The writer has to build the story up to its climax. Now the protagonist and his or her allies face some complications as they are moving along. Often things get worse for them and they need to find ways to tip the scale. And then comes Act 3, the resolution. What is it that your main character tries to do in the last act? He or she is actually doing something to tip the scale, face trials, solve problems. So as a writer, you have to build towards a satisfying conclusion here, that is living up to the promises that you made much earlier on in the story. And your plot is connected to your characters and setting, and what is concentric to them is the conflict. That is what triggers off the action in your characters, in the setting, and the plot moves forward with this. Now let us understand what is the setting of a story. The setting of a story is where and when the narrative takes place, which involves both the time period and the geographic region, as well as individual locations within that region, such as a character's house, his place of work, or his favorite coffee shop, or that tree where he used to like to sit under the shade. Setting serves as the backdrop to everything that happens in a story and often contributes significantly to its atmosphere. This is why you must have noticed romance novels are typically set in small, cozy towns, and horror stories in isolated, unnerving places like a Transylvanian castle or a cabin in the woods, you know, the dark, deep forest or a cave. And a setting can be so powerful, it may even feel like a character itself. Now, what are the 3 types of setting? First is a temporal setting, that is the time, the era in which the story takes place. Second is the environmental setting, the larger geographical area. And third, the individual setting, that's the specific place within that area. This is something we just discussed a little while ago. Now, the setting, that's the physical location of the story, can heavily inform and influence a story's mood. For example, typically, a story that is set during a sunny day with flowers blooming and the birds chirping will be predisposed to a happy or carefree mood, while a story set in a haunted house will be predisposed to a sense of tension or fear. And I hope you'll all agree with me over there. Now let's take, for example, the novel The Great Gatsby. To demonstrate the importance of a setting correctly, let's look at the settings that were used in this novel. The temporal setting, the American 1920s, right in the heart of the Jazz Age. The environmental setting, southeastern New York City and Long Island. Individual setting, the Gatsby Mansion, Tom and Daisy's mansion, Martel's apartment, and the Plaza Hotel, and more. Here, learners, if you have read this novel, try to think for a moment that it was set in the Jazz Age in the 1920s. Had it been set a decade later in the 1930s during the Great Depression, the novel would not have carried the same effect. Had it been set in any other city apart from New York, maybe it wouldn't have had the same kind of effect on the readers. So this is the importance of a setting. Another novel that I'd like to take is To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. The setting is in Macomb, Alabama. And this is a classic about American race relations in the 1930s. This takes place in a small town. Notice how the narrator, Scout, describes Macomb as a place that stifles him. It's humid and old-fashioned, and it establishes the era's status quo of oppression and suffering. This is the importance of a setting which would not have come across if this place was New York instead. So, dear learners, I would advise you that when you are writing your narrative, your story, please choose your setting wisely. Exactly where and when will your story take place? Take this time to nail down the details. And if it is contemporary, does that mean present day or 10 years ago? If it is in a certain country, which city and town? And if you have multiple settings, which is also very possible, how long will the characters spend in each place? Is this setting a real place? And if so, how much research will it require to convey in good faith? This is very, very important to establish the credibility and authenticity of your setting. And if it is merely based on a real place, how much overlap will there be? Otherwise, you have the option of a completely fantasy setting like you have in fairy tales. Now, the next important thing is that you have to develop your characters' relationships to the setting. How will the setting of the story factor into the characters' lives? Will it help them or prevent them from achieving their goals? And if neither, why choose the setting at all? Then maybe it is not the right setting. These relationships can take many forms. Let's say your main character has lived in the same town their entire life. They might have a long time fondness for it. Or they could be recent and feel trapped by the setting. Whatever you've decided in your mind, the way you want to write the narrative, make sure this nuance comes through in your narration. It's like the protagonist returning to her old home after many years to reclaim her past life, and each room that she goes into holds special memories for her. Or your protagonist moves from her hometown to a new city and how it feels so cold for her, so unwelcoming for her. These are very, very important elements in a narrative. Now, when you have established your setting, focus on what is unique. Not every element of your setting will be worth noting. So just pay attention to things that are really different and really fascinating. Every city has buildings, they've got sidewalks, but how are they different from every other city? If someone leans their head out of their window, what do they hear besides the traffic or the birds? Does the town square smell like bread from the local bakery or the pollution from a nearby factory? These are little nuances that you have to pay attention to and craft them well and weave them into your narrative. Now, start chalking down the details. What is the history of this area? What's the weather like in each season? What are the biggest landmarks of this setting? In what sort of homes do people live, at least the majority of them? Are they shanties? Are they ghettos? Are they condominiums? Are they mansions? How do people tend to get around? Do they drive? Do they walk? Are they traveling on horse, carriages? Why do people like or dislike visiting this place? And most importantly to each of these questions, how is this detail going to affect my characters in the story? This is something that you must keep primemost in your mind. Then please use the stream of consciousness style of writing, and that is using all your 5 senses. That is the sense of sight, the sense of smelling, the sense of taste, the sense of hearing, and the sense of touching, perception. As you describe each setting of your story, make sure you just don't talk about how it looks. Instead, talk about the smells that came, talk about the sounds you heard, talk about how certain things felt when you touched them, even taste you can talk about. Not in every description, but you shouldn't even rehash the settings that you've already described, but see where you can include it appropriately. As a rule of thumb, each time your characters visit a new location or experience that location in a new context, you should devote a paragraph to the setting of that scene. And that is what will bring some contours and some flesh into your writing. Otherwise, the writing falls flat. Now we come to the important other part, and that is establishing the tone and mood. Often they are confused, but tone and mood are slightly different. Mood in literature is another word for atmosphere or ambiance of a piece of writing, whether it is a short story, a novel, or a poem, or an essay. Mood is the feeling that the writer is trying to evoke in their readers. Does that writing have a calming effect, or does it raise their anxiety? Does it make them happy, or does it well up anger inside them? Usually short stories or poems have limited moods, since there's not a lot of space for writers to juggle with, with multiple different moods. But now to tell you the difference between mood and tone. They are often confused, that they are similar, but they convey different ideas. Mood, like I just said, refers to the emotions that the writer evokes in the readers. Okay? But that's not the attitude of the narrator who's telling the story. So, tone is the tone that the narrator has adopted to tell that narrative. The writer could be sounding very irritated, could be sounding very grumbling and complaining while telling his story, and that could actually amuse the readers. Or the tone of the author could be very servile, subservient, very docile, humble, very obsequious. That could actually evoke sympathy in the readers or even anger in the readers. So that's the tone of the author. Let's look at some lines that we have taken from literature and see how a mood is painted. The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe. The lines: true, nervous, very, very dreadfully nervous I had been and am. But why will you say that I'm mad? The Pickwick Papers by Charles Dickens. The river, reflecting the clear blue of the sky, glistened and sparkled as it flowed noiselessly on. Look at the difference in the moods of these two lines. Look at these lines from The Highwayman by Alfred Moyes. The moon was a ghostly galleon tossed upon cloudy seas. The road was a ribbon of moonlight over the purple moor. And the highwayman came riding, riding, riding. The highwayman came riding up to the old inn door. Here the tension builds up, excitement builds up. So, though tone and mood can be easily mistaken for another, but they are different. While mood has to do with the feelings, like I said before, evoked in the reader, tone has got nothing to do with the reader and everything to do with the point of view of the character, either first person or third person. In short, tone is the narrator's attitude towards the events taking place. Tone can contribute to the mood of the story by helping evoke feelings in the readers, like, a rude narrator can actually sound funny in a story. Now, the next important thing that you have to pay attention to is your lexicon, your diction, your word choice. They build up the mood of the story. They establish the mood of the story. If the writer wants to create a jarring or frustrating mood, they can choose specific words that are harsh and staccato sounding. If they want to create a dark mood, they can use words with negative connotations to conjure brooding feelings. So, what I would advise you to do is to brainstorm mood words. If you are drawing a blank when it comes to creating a particular mood, it can greatly help you to prepare a list of words that will help to build up that mood. This is called thematic vocabulary. For example, if you want your story to have a creepy mood, look at these words: gloomy, creak, tiptoe, moonlight, skittering, shadow, rattling. My God, once you've built up a good list, pick out a few of your favorites and include them, weave them into your narrative, and sure enough, you'll have the right mood. Look at these words that I have got for you. Aren't these all very negative sounding? If you want to strike a negative mood, use words like acidify, aggressively, bitterly, corruptly, defiantly, disparagingly, egoistically, harshly, insufferably, insolvently, frantically, hurtfully, loudly, churlishly, deceitfully, dastardly. These are all very negative words. And you should have these as your tools of writing. Keep them in front of you and please use them wherever you can. The negative vocabulary list goes on. You can have strangely, recklessly, outrageously, outlandishly, slovenly, sinisterly, ruthlessly. The list goes on and on. Please go through the slide carefully and see these words. This is just one aspect of using your thematic vocabulary. If you want to describe beauty, if you want to describe nature, you want to portray nature in all its bounty, you want to describe a period of calm and peace, there are different words for it. And you must have a plethora of these words in front of you and choose the words that appeal to you the most. That's when the real effect will come. Now, the next important element is theme. Now, mood is not established just by the way the writer writes, the style that he chooses. It's also the subject matter. What is the theme that you've chosen? Is your theme about death? Is your theme about war and conflict? Is your theme about tragedy? Is your theme about metamorphosis? So there are some themes that have a very positive and upbeat mood, and while there are some things that have a very downswing mood. Now, if you constantly have mentioned in your story a lot of celebrations and festivities, that means the theme that you're evoking is something of celebration, something positive. But throughout your story you talk about loss, death, war, then it is a theme that is about sadness. These are things you must carefully think over much before you start crafting your piece. Then another beautiful style that you must try to adopt in your storytelling is learning how to subvert the expectations of a reader. It's very easy to go with the expected mood of your stories. For example, it's a story that you've chosen about a wedding. It will have a light-hearted, celebratory mood, and it all ends well where they get married to each other and live happily ever after. But then maybe that's not the right choice. How about subverting the reader's expectations and coming up with something very creative and exciting and combining that? Like, for example, a lot of festivities and they enter the place of wedding and they're expecting a grand gala wedding, but then maybe it turns into a ghost story, it turns into a crime thriller, or it turns into a real comedy of errors. So learn to innovate with moods to create a memorable and lasting writing. And then remember the last thing, the art of keeping your readers oriented. Ironically, one of the quickest ways to confuse your readers is to give them too much setting detail. So when you are introducing a setting, just be very concise. Keep it limited. A few evocative sentences will do. If you have something more to say about the setting, those details can come later as a part of the narrative, as a part of your tale. Because what will happen is, if you include too many details about your setting, the listeners will get distracted from the main plot, from the main story, because they will be working in their mind, trying to untangle that, hello, apart from these details, where is it that the action happened? So even when you're giving specific directions, about how your protagonist got there, the thumb rule is less is more. So with that, we come to the end of this tutorial on how to create good settings in your narratives. I hope you found this tutorial useful. Till I am back with more, this is goodbye from your lecturer, counselor, friend Kiran. Happy learning.